Welcome to Tactical Talk. This is Zain. Today the topic of our show is, does the American economic war on Turkey damage the European economy? Today the guest of our show is Alfons López Tena, who is a European politician and also a public intellectual. Welcome to our show, Alfons López Tena. This is Zain. It's a pleasure to have you on Tactical Talk.
Hi, good afternoon.
Alfons López Tena, let's get to the first question. After the US declared heavy tariffs on Turkey, the Turkish lira suffered heavily, which resulted in the euro sinking as much as 1.2%. How much further do you think this would affect the European currency?
I don't think it's going to affect very much because the Turkish crisis is a homemade crisis. I mean, the tariffs imposed by Trump were just the last straw over an economic situation of non-confidence by the markets because of the authoritarian grip of President Erdogan of the country. The Turkish currency has fallen around 40% in this year, but it has been 10% in the last weeks after the Trump tariffs. And those tariffs are not different from the other he has imposed to European countries or Japan or Canada or Mexico or about steel or aluminium. So it's a homemade crisis, and it's not so important for Europe because, we will see some data afterwards. But you may think that the problem now in Europe is moreover what is going to happen with Italy, not so much with Turkey, that is a lower influence on economics in Europe.
In your opinion, if the US and Turkish rift continues, do you think that if the Turkish economy further falls down, will it affect the European economy overall?
The European economy is affected in both ways, trade and debt. On trade is not so much important because Turkey depends on the European markets for a little bit less than 50% of all Turkish exports on goods and services go to the European Union, the European market, and Turkey has also a custom union with the European common market, a single market. But the exports from the European countries to Turkey is just less than 5%, less than 5% of the overall exports of the European Union. So it's not so important on trade. The other thing is debt, because Turkey has a lot of debt nowadays. That's the main problem. Its debt is more or less, I have it here, is $453 billion. And half of this debt is held in foreign currencies. So the problem is, as you see, if the Turkish currency plummets, in that case, the debt soars. And in the part of that, it's a lot of it is in a short term. It's just in a year must be honored, and around 80 billion is in companies and banks of the European Union. More from Spain, but 30 billion, for instance, is just one bank from Spain. But it's not so much important since it has happened a trend of disentangle themselves from Turkey in the last months, as we've seen afterwards.
Let's get to a very important question. How much trade does Turkey and Europe have between one another? How closely are they linked to each other? And lastly, how was the relationship between Turkey and Europe before all this started to happen?
As I've told you before, Turkey has a custom union with the European Union. So it means that there is a lot of trade between two parties. Turkey depends absolutely on the European markets. It's a little less, as I've told you, of 50% of all its exports go there, and also of its imports, but it's just less than 5% of European exports. So the link is that Turkish economy is deeply integrated with the European economy, but it's just a small part. You may think that its GDP is just less than 900 billion dollars. That is 3 times Pakistan's, more or less. So it's not so big as to present a systemic threat. It's not too big to fail. So too big to fail. It can fail perfectly without no more than ripples in the European economy.
Alfons López Tena, let's get to the last question. What do you think is the solution to this whole scenario? And do you think that further economic warfare by the US on Turkey could damage the European economy?
Well, the whole scenario is more complex, but it's related to another thing, to another matter. Is that the United States, the Federal Reserve, is going to suspected to raise up the interest rates, and the dollar is up. The American dollar is up. So that means that there is a lot of money to be invested into the United States, and so that means also that the debt bill of the countries that have borrowed in American dollars is going up steadily. That affects Turkey, but also India and Pakistan and Brazil and Mexico as well. And the other thing is that this kind of dependency of foreign debt by Turkey is lowering down. It's lowering down because since from the beginning of the year, there is a lot. It means more or less, I have here the data, is the investment, the direct investment in Turkey, in debt, in bonds, equity shares from the European countries has fallen more than 40%. So it means that the companies and banks are going out of Turkey. The solution in the short term is the classical solution. You have a debt problem, you have a currency problem, so you need a bailout given by the international institutions, because other countries, for instance, Qatar has offered $50 billion, but the overall Turkish debt that must be paid is $300 billion, so it's just 5%. So it's worthless. You need a bailout and you need a devaluation also. But the problem is, as you know, that President Erdogan is strongly has a crackpot ideas about economics, and he thinks that he can jail the economic markets and the economic trends as he has jailed judges, journalists, and 100,000 people in Turkey. But it doesn't work that way. So that's the short-term way out. The problem is that when you get an authoritarian ruler and strongman, well, everything comes from him. And there is no way to control, to check, and to balance his whims. And these whims, in the case of Erdogan's Turkey, are absolutely crackpot. So there is no solution in a short term except a bailout or except the crackdown of the country, the breakdown of the country.
Thank you so much, Alfons López Tena, for being on Tactical Talk. It was a pleasure having you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Khan.
This was Alfons López Tena. We were discussing, does the American economic war on Turkey affect European economy? Until the next episode of Tactical Talk, this is Zain Khan. Take care and goodbye.